And now we can begin. So as I said, our topic today is Palestinian women's voices. Our guest is Huda Abuarquob. I've known Huda for quite a while personally, and for quite a while before I knew her personally, I had heard of her and had been looking forward to the day that I would get to meet her, because she's quite well known in the bridge building, peacemaking circles here in Palestine, Israel, Judea and Samaria. Huda lives in a suburb of Hebron, which is only a half-hour drive from my house, called Dura, and she serves as the regional director of ALLMEP, the Alliance for Middle East Peace. As I said, she's been a peace activist, a well-known one, for many years, and she's a central force in the organization that perhaps many of you have heard of, Women Wage Peace. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Huda to talk about Palestinian women's voices. And of course, after she speaks, there'll be time for questions and answers. Hello, Huda. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rav. Thank you, Rabbi Hanan. I really appreciate it. And hello, everybody from all over the United States, but especially Berkeley people. And Judy, I know you from my times living in the Bay Area, and I know your activism, and I still commend you for still doing what you are doing, you and Seema. The way we talk about women normally, and of course Diana Kotlu also, it's great to see you from sorry, I have an issue with my internet. But normally what happened with women, we come from a place of victimhood. You know, women pay the price. Women are the ones who are suffering. Women are the victims of violence. And we tend to forget the other part of it, that also women are the most resilient creatures on earth. And they can get up and take the lead and change their destiny. And Israel and Palestine is just another example of that steadfastness, that resiliency that we are looking at when we examine other examples of women thriving in context of violent conflicts. One of the things that I want to bring to our attention, because Roots is such a dear organization to my heart, and I fought so hard to get it to be part of ALLMEP. I do believe that we need to talk to the quote-unquote called settlers, the people who come from a different understanding of their connection to the land, but also they are the most, especially in the last crisis with annexation, I think this community was one of the most vocal communities, and the one that brought the equal rights conversation into the annexation conversation. So Roots is close to my heart, and I support it with everything that I can. And every time I get an invitation from them, I show up, and I respect Hanan, Rav Hanan a lot, and I consider him as my rabbi. I am a Muslim, but I need a rabbi at some point in my life. And he's one of the people who brings a lot of light to my brain and my heart. Now, when it comes to women in Israel and Palestine, the complexity of identity is one of the issues that has to do with us not being fully engaged in peace building in general, although we are maybe a majority in peace building. But the fact that we have names and narratives that are connected to these names, such as Palestinian, Israeli, settler, non-settler, Tel Avivers versus Gush Etzion residents, bereaved or not bereaved, which is an experience that many of the women in Palestine and in Israel experience. And we know that, pain has no colors. It's the same color. It hurts in the same way it hurts any person with any kind of identity. Still, in Israel and Palestine, in this conflict, they want to try and use women in a way that shows that women are one of the reasons why this conflict is not coming to some sort of a solution. And one of these things, and I have to stand here to speak about the Palestinian women. Not only that they are, they are struggling to keep a humane perspective of what's happening around us. Not only that they are victims of violence that is internalized. Many of them are married to workers who work inside Israel, who cross checkpoints on daily basis. And I don't have to bring the psychological trauma that people get when they cross checkpoints, but this is taking, as much as men want to self-restrain themselves crossing checkpoints, they come home and they lay it on their children. It not only that they are fighting for their own rights within the Palestinian society, they want to change some of the family laws, and they managed to do that. They want to be engaged in the political arena, and they've managed to do so. But still, the international world looks at Palestinian women as terrorists. They call them, they accuse them of sending their kids to death. They are the ones who support their kids becoming suicide bombers or stabbers. And this is something that hits me in the heart, because I work with women who lost their children to this conflict, and they would do anything in the world to have one day back with their sons and daughters who were lost to that conflict. And I know that their heart's in the right place. And I work with women who ask the question about why the peace building community is so closed, why only we speak to the people who speak our language, who empathize with us, but we don't speak to those who are not on the same page, to those who see us as enemies. I work with women almost on a daily basis, even during COVID time, and that question is on the table. Many of the organizations that I work with, they wouldn't be open to talking to settlers or the settler community or religious community or Orthodox Jewish community. Women want to talk to them because they think there is a reason why everyone is avoiding talking to them. What is it? What's the mystery about settlers and settlements? It's not enough what we hear in the media. We need to talk to them. We need to see what's happening, why they are so violent. Because to us, as Palestinians, unfortunately, our experience with the Israelis in general has to do with violence. Less we know, very little we know about the Israelis who are engaged in nonviolence. Very little is known to us, even from peace building experiences. We feel all, paralyzed when violence actually happens inside the Palestinian society. We have, and everything comes back to our minds that the Israelis are soldiers, the Israelis are settlers who run over kids in South Hills of Hebron, or burn olives, or everything that is connected, especially to this community. The settler community is connected to violence. And this is actually very dangerous when you look at the long run on the images of the Israelis and connecting it to their Jewishness. And as someone who worked with Jewish community in the Bay Area and in New York area and in Israel and Palestine, I know that this is not Judaism. One of my heroes is Rabbi Joshua Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he's one of the people who marched with Martin Luther King. So why we got the Jews who want to kill us? Why don't we have the Jews who march with us, who stand by us to free ourselves and free them in the same time? And Roots is one of those Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's followers who carry his knowledge, his passion, his human teachings of Judaism. And I have to say that when I get to know the settler community and Judur and roots, and then I come back home and I hear our experiences, the people around me, and their experiences with Israel and Judaism, I feel very sad. But I don't have enough tools to defend Judaism and the Jewish people who not necessarily believe that in order to be in the land or share the land, you need to push the other in the sea, or one Palestinian, a dead Palestinian is better than whatever. And I have to say that these teachings also come from both sides. There are very extreme religious rhetoric that is being ignited in Palestine and fed by the violence around us, that uses Islam also in the same way, and you know, destroys the essence of Islam. So what women can do when women are always in religion, are told that they cannot be part of that religious discourse, they cannot be an authority in religion. When we sit in a room and there is a question about religious teachings, we as women don't trust ourselves in responding to that, and we look for a man, even if he's not a Rav or an Imam, we look for him to get answers. It's about, to me, this is where we do unpacking of all kinds of narratives, including the religious narrative, the national narrative. And we need to free women from being put in a frame that they cannot do, they cannot say, they have no authority, and they only need to be the ones we use all the time as the victims, the image of victims. And in Israel and Palestine, I met thousands of women who freed themselves and freed their own community from that conversation. And we have been engaged since 2014 in conversations that has to do with feminist political, and again, don't hate me for feminist. Feminist doesn't mean pushing men to the sea. It's not about otherization. It's about another style of leadership. And we created an entire framework of thinking that called feminist inclusive political activism, where everybody and every voice counts, and everyone has the right to express their ideas. And once his or her ideas are out there, we can start working on unpacking them. We can start opening our hearts and minds in order to change the dominant narratives that has been fed to us since we were kids. And I'm talking about both peoples, and maybe the entire world. Even the image in the international community about the Israelis and Palestinians is corrupted by that image. It's a bunch of crazy people who want to kill each other, and we will watch who's going to win. This is what I hear sometimes from EU, from American representatives in the peace building world. It's not true. And I have hope. I'm sorry, when I was in the Bay Area, I didn't have that much hope about us until I came back and I started working with us, with the people like Rav Hanan, and with the people like Women Wage Peace and Hands of Peace and Seeds of Peace, and all of these organizations that is now at this moment are changing the discourse. It's not just about the left and the lefty notions, although there is nothing wrong about being left other than being a bubble. It's about opening up your heart and your tent to everyone, even if it's not left, even if he or she is not left. And the people since 2014 who started that conversation, and I have to give credit only to women who are part of the peace building community in Israel and Palestine. When we met in 2014 as a group of women leaders within the peace building community, we insisted that this conversation has to go out of the room. The dialogue needs to move to action, and we need to be open to other ideas and opinions. And boy, since then, we have not settled, and we will not settle until we have our kids back home safe and sound, and we free ourselves from the stigma that we want our kids to be killed. Thank you so much, Rav Hanan, and I want to open it for questions. If there is any question, you guys, please don't feel that you need to be politically correct or you need to be courteous or anything. Just feel free to ask any question, even if you think that question is offensive. I am very happy to answer any question because we don't get that much or that many opportunities to meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. So we have a long time for questions and answers. Why don't we do it even orally? You could unmute yourselves, anyone who wants to speak, and ask a question.
Okay.
Huda,
No.
Huda,
Yes?
who do you think is responsible for the misinformation that's generated on both sides? Is it coming from schools? Is it coming from religious organizations? Who do you think is responsible for perpetrating the bad information and keeping us essentially as enemies?
Thank you, Gilda, for the question. I think this is one of the most important questions that I always get because people think that it's only the educational systems, and both educational systems are guilty. The American educational system also is guilty when it comes to Black lives and to indigenous. The educational systems are built to give a voice only to the dominant party, to the dominant narrative. But I have to say, in Palestine and Israel, the source is our daily exchanges and experiences. And I have seen how people in Palestine, especially in the South Hills of Hebron, that is always threatened by land confiscation and experience a lot of settler violence, how the image changed when many of the Israeli and Jewish international peace builders came and lived with them for months to change that. And they said, not in our name, not in the Jewish name, not in the name of the Jewish people. We cannot be doing this. And it changed completely the image for the Palestinians. And finally, they've managed to see that not all, we should not generalize when we talk about Jews and Israelis. We shouldn't. We should not condemn the religious people in Israel, because we've seen religious people coming and telling us that this is not religion, this is not in our religion. So I think the direct teacher of our interactions and images is our daily interactions. And I want to give you an example of a Palestinian, before COVID-19, of a Palestinian kid who goes to a school in Hebron, in the old city of Hebron. The amount of violence that this Palestinian kid sees, and I'm sure you've seen images of that little, it's a small town, it's a small space in Hebron, in the old city of Hebron, that is run entirely by the settlers who live in people's homes and have thousands of soldiers to protect them. And there are few Palestinians who are allowed to live there using permits. And they go through metal detectors every day, every morning, every afternoon when they cross. And there are streets that they cannot even walk in. And they get attacked by the settler community there every day. And the reporting about that, when people talk about Israel apartheid being apartheid, that's the image that they bring. That's the old town of Hebron. And I acknowledge that in the old town of Hebron, there is a heritage, a Jewish heritage that my grandfather told me about. That my grandfather was very, very protective of the Jewish people who used to live there before 1929. And he actually took them, escorted them out of Hebron when the massacre happened in 1929. But the people who live now there, and mostly are New Yorkers, and you can hear their accent, the amount of violence they do to everyone, to women mainly, like snatching their hijab, their head cover, or beating their kids. even the kids who have special needs. We've seen images of this going viral all over the world. And we haven't seen one image of someone who can stand against it. We haven't seen one soldier has enough power to stop that. So this is how we learn about settlers and Jews. And Israel. We know, it's scary to me that when I hear young Palestinians say that the Jews don't want us, they want to massacre us. They want to massacre us, all of us. Look what happened in Sabra and Shatila. Look what happened in Gaza. Look what, and we don't, and when you ask them, but maybe maybe Israel is defending itself, because this is one of the notions. Defending itself against who? Against Hamas. The whole conversation about Hamas, again, it's another group that is driven by religious ideology. So that's why I think women and the peace building community that is inclusive and open to everyone has the chance to change these interactions, has the chance to undo the dominant narratives that we grow up. And we still hear, like if you open the news, any kind of news outlet, you hear the same thing. This against this, white against black, and good against bad, but there is no heart or soul to the story that comes from within. And unfortunately also the peace building community is so protective of its constituency, to the extent that we cannot come through and say that we have different experiences, we have a third narrative that we want to show to the world. And we're working on this. We're working on that visibility. We need to change these narratives by bringing in more positive narratives about the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians living together. We need to dig deeper into our teachings and find these stories and make them become these stories, the forward stories. And we need to look at our interactions now and bring examples of how a soldier helps a mother cross a checkpoint, because she's crossing the checkpoint with her, and this happened recently, with her special needs kid. One soldier didn't want them to go through, and he had all the permits, etc. But he has metal in his bones, and he was going to Hadassah for an operation. And one soldier insisted that they should not come in, and another soldier stood against that. But you cannot read that in New York Times. You cannot see it in our TV, on our mainstream media. So it's our mission as peace building community and as Palestinians and Israelis who believe that there is a chance for a different narrative to start making these stories more prominent.
Thank you, Huda.
I know, long answer, sorry guys.
Thank you.
Can I say something? I'd like to say something. My name is Judith. I live in Jerusalem, and I've been involved in various peace activities for a while as an individual. And that's my question, is how as an individual can I do something? So I'm an artist and I do collaborative work. I have a woman in China who I do work with. I have a black guy in the Bay Area who I do work with. And an Egyptian in Cairo who I do work with. These people I met at conferences, and some of it has to be undercover because the people where they are, the guy in Cairo can't really let his friends know that he's communicating with me. But I would be very open to be doing collaborative personal work with an artist. And I've never, the whole time I've been living here, I've been saying to people, I would like to meet some Arab artists. I would like to do work, and nothing ever materializes, it seems. So, and I've been close to Roots for a while, and the compassionate listening missions used to come, and I participated a little bit a while back. So it's suggestions. How do I get to meet an individual artist who might want to collaborate?
Judith, let's not think that the only way to do peace building is by talking to the Palestinians. We need to change that kind of mentality. And I think Rav Hanan understands where I come from. I think the most difficult conversations that we need to have are internal. We need to have them on a Shabbat dinner when we talk to our own family and friends who sometimes see us as traitors or as normalizers. this is where we need to start changing the narrative, because before I ran after another Palestinian to have a dialogue with, which is something that we do all the time. We get 20 Israelis and 20 Palestinians to sit in a room and bring top-notch facilitators to work with them, and they do unpack the narrative and they do acknowledge each other's pain, etc., but then they leave the room and do nothing. They go back to their respective communities with baggages of fear and sometimes guilt, that to the extent they cannot open up to their own society. And so that's why peace building was trapped in that bubble. And I do commend you for the work that you do. And I think art is one of the ways to heal people, not just to transform the conflict. But I think it's important to start these conversations internally before we seek another Palestinian. And I know many Palestinians who would love to work with Israelis. At this point, it's not just the normalization, being accused of normalizing the occupation, what keeps them away from it. It's actually the fact that we don't believe anymore that we have a partner in the Israeli society. And this is really, really daunting on the Palestinians. We don't feel that we have a partner. We now in a stage, we feel that we are even left alone, and we are being blamed for all the decisions that our leaders made. You know, even in the last agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, it was an agreement between leaders, but not people. The people of Emirates are against it, and they sent letters against it. So what's the point of having peace between two leaders who each of them is seeking more power, but not having peace with people? And I think if the Emiratis want to do peace, real peace, they need to engage in that conversation inside the Emirates. And we need to do the same thing in Palestine and the same in Israel. So my theory of change that I believe it works is that we need to do peace building internally first. We need to do dialogue internally first before we run after the other to do that conversation. And we need to get rid of the baggages that has to do with fear and also guilt that comes with our desire to seek the other. And I see this happening with women. You know, when I work with women, you need to work on the reconciliation piece. And most of the, you know, we have many funders who want to give us money to do reconciliation. And when I build the program of reconciliation with Israeli and Palestinian women, especially the ones who lost children to the conflict, I work on the reconciliation with oneself. Then with your family, and then with your community, and then you would be ready to do reconciliation with the other. But if you are not reconciled with your own self and your own pain, your own prejudice, you will not be able to be free enough, liberated enough to seek the other. And so I would encourage you, I'm happy to introduce you to people who can help with the art piece in Palestine, but I don't think it's going to work at this point. We feel now that nothing is working, literally. The amount of apathy that the Palestinians are experiencing now is unprecedented. The way the American administration has talked down to us, the way our leadership is failing us on all levels, the way that, you know, it's ironic to see that one hope that we are seeing now is that the people who are taking to the streets, the people who are against their own leaders, the systems. And we cannot go public and say we support the Israelis who are fighting for democracy and for their rights, and they want to get rid of a corrupted person, because what does that say about us? We need to do the same, but we cannot. So again, and I'm highlighting that the struggle is from within.
Huda, I'm going to take the liberty of saying a few words. I think that what you just said is very important for people to hear, and also for me to hear. But I do want to push back against a certain small part of what you said. What I'm going to say right now is my personal experience. It's the experience of many Israelis en route, and it's also the experience of many Palestinians en route. The following: we find that when Israelis try to tell Israelis that Palestinians are human beings, that Palestinians are not evil, they're not terrorists, we find ourselves coming against a brick wall. And any type of effort we make to speak up to our own, it turns into a political argument between right and left, etc. And the Palestinians en route often have the same experience, that it's hard for them to talk to their own people. But my experience is an Israeli that I can't get through to him, convincing that Palestinians are anything more than the scenery that we just have to ignore, or terrorists. If I can get that Israeli to meet a Palestinian, the very experience of the human-to-human contact can break through in a place that I can't break through. And the same thing on the other side. My Palestinian partner sometimes says, many of them say, that he's talked to his friends for months and years trying to tell them that Israelis are worth talking to, that there's a human being there, that there's a narrative that has some legitimacy. It doesn't work. But when my Palestinian partner convinced his friends to meet me, within 2 meetings, there was a new perspective.
You're not pushing back. You're supporting my talk. The most difficult part of any peace dialogue is getting people into the room. And in order to do that, you need to do a lot of work first outside the room in order to get them to the room. I don't think it's enough now it's not that much appealing for Palestinians to participate in dialogue meetings because they can get a permit and then go to the sea. This is not peace building. This is like responding to a certain need, and we've seen that, Rav Hanan. We've seen people, we worked so hard to get them together in one room, we got them permits, and then once we are in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, the Palestinians are outside, going to the sea, shopping, not fully present, playing nice all the time if they stay in the room, but not compromising that privilege that comes with a permit. And we moved beyond that, and we got Palestinians and Israelis to meet in sea areas. That is also now a shrinking space for Palestinians and Israelis. They meet in sea areas where Israelis and Palestinians are allowed to meet, and there's Israeli security, but there is coordination among Palestinians, especially the mukhabarat, the intelligence, etc. It's like when you look at the context outside, even the power dynamics are not working for advancing the dialogue to moving to action. And so we have 3 different phases here. You need to work internally to get people into the room, and then you have to work on the piece, and then you have to empower people to go outside the room and go back to their respective community and start doing some changes within their community. Otherwise, this peace building will continue to be confined into these small rooms. Yes, and it's not going to be genuine. I assure you it's not going to be genuine. And I have to attest to the fact that the Israelis who are in the room are more invested because they really want to see some changes. But the Palestinians who are in the room, I would say at least 60% of them are not invested. They just need that piece of paper that gives them a glimpse of what it means to be an Israeli inside Israel. And that's why we have now 80% of the youth in Palestine don't believe in the 2-state solution anymore. Not because they think Israel is a haven of democracy. They are willing, when you talk with them, they are willing to live in an apartheid. They know how to fight apartheid, but at least it will give them an access.
I just want to make sure that everyone understood Huda's reference to permits. Perhaps you don't know, it's important to understand that Palestinians are forbidden by Israeli military law from entering the state of Israel, from crossing from the Palestinian territories over to the Green Line, which means that they can't go to the ocean. It means they can't go to perhaps the place they were born. They can't go to traditional Palestinian areas like Haifa, or like Lud, or like Ramla, or like Akko. And there is one way for Palestinians to go into Israel, which is to get a permit from the Israeli army. but it's really hard to get that permit. And in many cases, as Huda was hinting, peace organizations like Roots are allowed by the Israeli army to submit requests in the name of Palestinians to get them permits to go into Israel. Now, in many cases, the permits are to go into Israel to participate in a dialogue event with Israelis. But the Palestinians, many of them, as Huda said, are participating in the dialogue event just to get the permit to go into Israel, to have freedom of movement, to see the ocean, to bathe, to see their traditional lands. And a situation created in which Palestinians are willing to enter dialogue in a quid pro to get something out of it. Just want to make sure everyone understood what Huda was talking about.
Yeah. So, So I'm very interested. I think that this is, well, interesting and sad. I see, there are a lot of obstacles on both sides. Start with the Israeli side. Reading a lot of the Israeli messaging about Palestinians, there is a fundamental messaging that Palestinians are unwanted. So I just finished a book called Waste Siege, which is an anthropological study of the anthropology of garbage and other waste and pollution in Palestine, in the West Bank, in the larger context of Palestinians as being an unwanted people. And so that metaphor, sometimes even explicitly, that metaphor occasionally even explicitly is part of the Israeli side's messaging, and Palestinians' reaction of not wanting to be wanting to be wanted is as people. I find it very understandable, personally. On the Palestinian side, there, at least from what I'm reading, there's things like excluding Israelis except within the resistance framework. That's basically PACBI, definition of normalization, which, as I understand, you tell me if this is all wrong, is sort of centrist within Palestinian mindset. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that is at least the impression I get as an outsider. But there is also, normalization is a way to smear people. It's not just used as a way to enforce a standard, it's also used as a way to smear people very easily. It spreads like wildfire. It creates a cancel culture. Two people can do the same thing, and one is labeled as a normalizer and the other one is not, and a lot of it is based on things like their social connections. And the other question becomes, how does one define normalization and interaction within the resistance framework, period? And at what point does the cancel culture shut down the culture? So, yeah.
So if you were cutting off, Rebecca, so I think the question is around normalization and how we can frame normalization when it comes to this work, peace building work versus resistance, etc. I would give you my own take on it, and I wrote an article few years ago about it. I think the anti-normalization movement has been using it's used and used, you know. So it's the first layer of it. Anti-normalization has been used by the Israeli government in so many ways to prove that the Palestinians are not interested in peace, and they want to kill the Israelis. And the other facet of it It's actually another form in Palestine, another form of oppression for the Palestinians that is coming from within. And I called it an elite movement at some point, because many of those anti-normalizing advocates, either have other passports on them, they can travel the world whenever they want. They get invitation to speak on behalf of the Palestinians, even if they don't live in Palestine. They get to tell us, the people who live in Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza, how to be Palestinians. And I find that very condescending, but also another form of oppression, just like when you have Fatah and Hamas trying to impose a way of resistance on the Palestinians. And I put anti-normalization also up there. And I have questions for them. I try to engage with them. Never got successful, but they've never attacked me. Just so for the record, they've never come after me. And I am out there, like I just write my name. You see me speaking in publicly. I'm writing. I'm not afraid of what I'm saying, because I'm not selling also short when it comes to my identity and my understanding. I feel that it's about time for us to stop giving in to systems. And I'm not calling for anarchy. I am calling only for us, the Palestinians and the Israelis, to claim our space, to name our needs, to bring our aspirations forward. I don't believe, even within the most extreme among the Israeli community and the Palestinian community, I don't believe that there is a notion for death for the sake of death. It's just and this is me, I could be wrong. It's another act of desperation. It comes from a place where voices are not heard. It comes from a place where you're always driven by guilt. It comes from a place of insecurity. We're always fearful. We've been building monsters of each other. And then you have the enemies from within. I call them the enemies from within, because they go after they attack the basics of your steadfastness. What the Palestinians have been successful so far since 1948, and even before, we fought before 1948, other regimes and other systems. We were fighting to be wanted, to be acknowledged, to be recognized for who we are. We've always been asked to be under one umbrella or one system or another system. And we got to a point where these systems now have competing narrow interests and not giving a damn about the Palestinians, who are millions, whether they are in Israel, in Palestine, or in Israel, or even in the diaspora, in Gaza, or in the diaspora. Now, every faction, including what I call anti-normalizers and BDS, I would also say that BDS, they fight their own fights on the upper level, and they never talk to us. Many of our negotiators are not refugees and never been in a refugee camp. So how could they know what the refugees in Lebanon want? We've been always overlooked by the entities that claims that they can speak on our behalf. The only place we find ourselves able to speak our own truth as individuals is the peace building community, with many restrictions. And that's why we are very, very protective of the people who sit in the room and say something. We don't want to expose them, because we know that the world outside is a little bit dangerous. If they speak against Israel, they get the risk of being arrested in the middle of the night. If they speak against the Palestinian Authority, they will be arrested by the Palestinian Authority. If they speak against Hamas, they will be arrested by Hamas. But the anti-normalizers and the BDSers don't worry about their self-security. They live in places that guarantee, at least to them, the freedom of speech.
But we never hear from Palestinians, excuse me, Huda, we never hear from Palestinians that they're not happy with the BDS movement, that they wish the BDS movement would understand the Palestinians a little bit better. We don't hear the Palestinians saying, we're not happy with the BDS. We hear the Palestinians applauding the BDS.
Where do you
on
live,
campuses.
Stephen? Where do you live, Stephen?
I live in the United States, and we
Where
see,
exactly?
and we see. I live in Florida and in New York.
And I agree completely with you. I worked for 7 years with students from Palestine for justice in Palestine, and Hillel students on the hotbed campuses like Berkeley and SF State and Florida. I even came to Florida and spoke there. It's all about that guilt. If you are not living in the land, this is what we do to our own diaspora. We always accuse them of being away from us, so they don't get to speak about on behalf of us, so they better do something else. And the better something else they find is the BDS. You know, most of the Palestinian kids that I worked with when I lived in the Bay Area, they are on the same page like me, but they cannot come forward and say that they are against BDS because they see that BDS is being praised by the enemy, just like Hamas.
So,
you know, the successes, the fear, may I just finish?
Yeah.
You know, the policies of the Israeli government empowers Hamas. The policies of the fact that stuff that works by intimidation also is empowering groups. But I have to say also, when I worked with Hillel students, the amount of hate that is being fed to them through videos, through the Palestinians and the Israelis who are in the diaspora are victims of dominant narratives, and they don't know how to engage. And I have been, you know, that's why I said that I lost hope when I was living in the Bay Area, because it was very difficult to get Israelis and Palestinians sit in a room and talk about the people of Israel and Palestine. And instead of importing the conflict to their campuses, what they did is they exported it back to us. And I think this is not efficient, and it's not going to help the Palestinians, and it's not going to help the Israelis. One way to help the Palestinians is at least to think that the Palestinians need higher education. Let's support the students who are brilliant, who are studying on campuses and get no funding. Let's support the women or groups that needs to be engaged with the other and change the narrative. No, we just support the Palestinian women who do embroidery, and we use them. We actually, I've seen Palestinian women used by other Palestinian women to show that we have embroidery, and we sell the embroidery in the name of the struggle. I am sick and tired of that. Palestine doesn't need show off. If we believe that we have the right, we will fight for it everywhere we go, by every means. And we don't say that this works and this doesn't work, and we name and blame and shame. And I would say to you, Stephen, don't generalize. When you say Palestinians, what do you mean by Palestinians? I'll stop you right there. Just like when I say Israelis or Jews, you should stop me. Because one of them, the issues of that is actually, you know, attacking our humanity is the fact that we generalize.
That I agree with, and I apologize if it came off
Don't
in a generalization.
That's the environment that you guys live in. And it saddens me, especially because I know Hanan, Rav Hanan. When when we are sitting in the room and we get people to troll us about, you know, you guys are normalizers or traitors. I know Rav Hanan got that more than anybody else. I've seen women who are part of the peace building community that would march with me in the South Hills of Hebron, called whores by their own people. Israeli women called whores by their own people. And then you get the elite community that lives in some sort of democracy. At least they have some sort of freedom when it comes to freedom of speech and movement. And they get the audacity to come and tell us how to live our lives. I am done with this. I'm not going to accept it. And I'm going to name people, and I'm going to tell them, you guys don't live in Dura. You did not wake up this morning on tear gas being thrown at your house. This happened to me this early morning. So I get to know how to live my life and how to support my steadfastness as long as I'm staying on the land. One of the fears that I have, and it's happening right in front of our eyes now, that none of the young Palestinians want to stay on this land. They want one chance to leave. And at some point, the peace building community used to provide that for them, to get them to go to camps and do whatever, and then get them recommendation letters to go to universities somewhere and never come back. And anyone who compromises any element of steadfastness for Palestinians who are living on the land by cutting their salaries or arresting them for speaking against anything that has to do with their own rights, or telling them that they are not enough, they are not Palestinians enough, is a traitor, in my opinion, because it compromises the very core of the Palestinian struggle, which is steadfastness.
We have many people who want to ask questions. Judy, I see your hand.
Yeah.
Wait a second, Judy. I put you in the queue in the chat box. There's a few people before you. I want to go back to the question of Eileen Rosenthal. First of all, she points out that you're amazing, Huda, and then she says the following: can you tell us what it's like negotiating with the men who are the leadership in your community? What tactics have you found helpful to get men in our own camps to hear women's voices?
Excellent question.
For the Palestinian men in general, I work with very strong Palestinian women, very strong. I cannot generalize and say all Palestinian women are in the same position, but the women that I work with that are not, elite and don't wear embroidery to show off their Palestinian identity or use other women, the women who are actually they planned the land. During COVID time, they turned all to being organic garden advocates and teaching their kids to be connected to the land by doing agricultural projects. These women, when men are not happy about them going to meet with other Israeli women, they tell them, you're going to normalize. And and I have many examples of that. One woman told them, if you paid the price that I paid for the conflict, then come and normalize with me. Another woman told other men, why are you so fearful of having a conversation with the other? I thought that you guys are, strong and you're fighting and, you're resistant people. Is resistant only about carrying a gun or carrying a stone? What about the resistance that is by brain, changing people's minds and hearts? Can you sit in the room with people and bring your own intelligence to this? Can you bring your own confidence in your identity? Are you confident about your Palestinian identity? Do you want to compromise about your right of return? Do you want the women ask the BDS questions and the anti-normalization questions to men and ask them, if you can live with someone who is your boss in Israel and you're doing their home, why cannot be on equal foot with them in one room and tell them that you have the same right, that you have the right to live on this land? So the convincing come in different ways. And there are so many examples, like the example in Tunisia, the example in Liberia, in Rwanda, how women turned men from being the other to being the partner. And only women can do that. I don't think that it's a question of whether men want to be engaged or not. It's a question of how you approach the other. In this case, is men in our community. I will tell you that I as a Palestinian peace activist who have been in this field for more than 20 years, who have been participating before Oslo and after Oslo in all kinds of conversations with Israelis, I've never had someone standing against me from my family or my community. If any, they always praise me for the work that I'm doing. Some called it jihad, depending on where they come from. They thought that this is the highest form of resistance. Others thought that it's about time for us to let our truth be spoken by us rather than spoken on behalf of us. Others told me this is the only way to change the dynamics of the conflict. Go and we will support you. And again, for the credit of anti-normalization group in Ramallah, they've never came after me.
Thank you, Huda. We have lots more questions. We have the following question. What do you think, Huda, about the right to return for Palestinians, the right of Jews returning and making aliyah, and how does that impact peace?
If it's guaranteed for both people on equal footing, yes, it's a right, and every people have the right to practice their own rights with no fear and no discrimination. What I am very supportive of the right of return for the Palestinians to come back to their land and to have the choice whether to come back or to choose something else. No one even asked them. I've done a research, I wrote a chapter in a book, and none of our negotiators or even us asked them the question of what you want. What does the frame of right of return means to you? And if you give it up, what does that mean to you? No one asked these questions to the refugees themselves. So I'm very supportive of the right of return as the right of return to be practiced by the people who want to come back. And there are many ways to organize that in a creative way that doesn't affect that doesn't threaten Israel and its demography. Now, the same thing about the Jews who live among us, who come from Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Morocco. I'm proud of Morocco because they are allowing many of the Jews to come back to Morocco, reclaim their property, even giving them passports. I think this is the way to do it. Now, when it comes to Aliyah and the Jewish Aliyah in its religious context, but also in its modern understanding now, and I know that there are changes happening, to come to Israel without looking at Palestine, this is discriminatory. When you convince young Jews to come to Israel, telling them this is all Israel and there are no Palestinians, and you keep half of the story away from them, and I've dealt with young Jewish kids in California who did Aliyah and came back feeling very guilty because once they knew that there is another narrative, they were very angry at their community. So I'm very supportive of any right that gives full recognition of the people of that right to either practice it or not practice it, and not use it as a tool to manipulate their lives and keep them hostages in camps, in hostile communities, and say this is the right of return.
There's another question. Stephen is online. Stephen, did you already ask what you wanted to ask?
Yeah, oh, you're asking me, Stephen?
Yeah, Stephen Fisher, you're in the order of the questions. It's now your turn.
Oh, that might have been an older question, but I have so many questions, so I'll start with this. Huda, if you get a permit or a pass and you travel in Israel Central, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, do you feel safe when you are in those main areas, in those main Israeli areas?
The honest question, the honest answer, no. When I get into a taxi, I don't wear hijab, as you can see. So there is not that much that can tell that much about my identity. But if I get in a taxi, and this taxi, and taxi drivers in Israel and Palestine are very curious. So and I use English everywhere I go. One of my survival mechanisms is even on checkpoints, I use English. I have the privilege of using English, and it puts me in a different place. So when I get in a taxi in Tel Aviv, once I get into the central center of Tel Aviv, and I want to go, for instance, to the USAID office or one of the diplomatic missions, and they ask me, where are you from? And the question, I don't want to lie, and I say, I'm from here. You're from here. Are you, like, are you Turkish? Are you Spanish? And I get the Spanish all the time. Like they think that I'm Spanish. I don't know why. And then we engage, you know, in a conversation that always is political. You know, that Muhammad married women when they were young. He should be, yani, he is a rapist. Muhammad is a rapist. Muslims don't have brains. Muslims are killers and terrorists. You know, I was in the Israeli army and I served in Hebron. The Palestinians hate us. I wouldn't mind killing them all. I heard that more than once in a car with Israeli drivers who speak very little English, wanting to engage, wanting to make their case appealing to this foreigner who is Spanish or Turkish. And I cannot tell you how intimidating that experience to me, although I continued to engage and talk about, you know, peace, and we need peace. How many Palestinians do you know? I only know the Palestinians who throw stones at me. I was like, why did they throw stones at you? I was like, I was in a Jeep in the middle of Hebron, a military Jeep. So do you think the Jeep was the, you know, the whole unpacking? But I've been very intimidated because if I am not wearing hijab and I don't have an accent and I didn't use Arabic and still managed to hear all of that from Israeli drivers, taxi drivers, what would happen to a woman who's wearing hijab?
So I can only tell you from my experience, from what I see, and when I go to the malls or when I go walking on the streets in Jerusalem and the women have a hijab, they are treated, as far as I see, again, not in your areas, and I've seen your areas when it gets bad and unjustified hostility. But in Israel, with Israelis in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, I see thousands of women wearing hijab with no problem. We're shopping in the same malls. We're living together. We're together. What I see more fearful is at bus stops, young girls having to hold guns at bus stops to not look for Arabs to shoot, but to protect Israelis. That's how that's how I, as a person who travels to Israel and as a person who is sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but that's what I see. I see Israeli villages surrounded by gates and checkpoints. I see the fear more on that side from hostilities coming. I don't see Arab villages in Israel or in the West Bank areas in the Shomron that are surrounded by gates, and they fear the Israelis. They fear the army coming. They fear if an attack happens that the village is going to be harassed by the military. But they do not display that kind of fear where there are gates around or anything else. We and travelers and people who come to Israel see, like I say, in the Shomron, we see at the bus stops 19-year-old girls, skinny little young girls, holding machine guns just to protect the people who are just trying to go from point A to point B. So,
do you believe that protection is a right for everyone, every human being, from fear?
100%, 100%. If an Israeli car, this is what I see. I like I say, in the West Bank, I'm only just barely being able to see these things. I'm trying to educate myself to know more. I see there are things that I need to apologize for as a Jew to the Muslim community, to the Palestinian community. I see many, many things that need to be apologized for, that nobody should go through the things that are happening today. But for Palestinians must realize they come through a metal detector, not because we just want to see if Palestinians have jewelry or metal, or they want to go to the beach. We just want to know, I say, not only me as a Jew, but Christians and other Muslims want to know that when we go to the mall or we go to the pizza shop, that there is not a problem. That's why there are metal detectors there.
Exactly, and that's why we need to do the same in Palestine. when Israeli army comes in the middle of the night to raid the land on the excuse of security. I need security, Stephen. I am a human being.
You
and
deserve
I have
security.
Fear, and I deserve security. And as a woman also, I need to know that I can sleep at night in my house without the fear of being raided by Israeli soldiers who are faceless, masked, etc., etc. I want to see the human being behind that mask. But again, I don't blame the Israeli, and you should not blame the Palestinians. We all have different ways of securing ourselves. The Israeli society is fortunate enough to have every individual in Israel is an army person. Everyone, do you know how difficult it is for me to sit with Israelis who have been in the Israeli army?
I understand.
How intimidating that could be. If I just start telling you the stories that I had with guns and soldiers, that would take any kind of security. And I don't have an entity or a government or the United States that giving my government money in order to secure armed security for me. Okay.
So
if we want to go into that route, I think we need to have some empathy and putting ourselves in the shoes of the other.
Stephen, I can't let you. There's so many people. I want to let Huda speak.
Yeah. I hate to see on Gosh Etzion. I was stopped more than once by Israeli army kids, and the minute I speak in English, their demeanor changes. And when they ask me, what do you do? And I tell them, I am working so hard so for you to have a life and not be standing here. They don't believe me. They don't believe me. Because if we let go of that gun, you will kill me. This is what they are also taught. Again, it has foundations in the way we interact with us. But isn't it the time to change it?
100%. I totally respect everything you're saying, Huda. I am on a learning journey myself. Rabbi Hanan had explained to me also about the defense. The Palestinians have their right. That this is the way some things are defended. We are learning, but we need to learn, Huda. We need to learn, and we need both to understand.
That's why we are here.
And we all greatly appreciate your bravery to come to speak. We all appreciate that you look forward. And I'll finish with one thing, Rabbi. I know I don't want to monopolize. One of the things that impressed me the most with Roots was when I went to meet Ali Abu Awad. Ken, I just know him as Ali. When I went to meet with him, and I came there, and there were soldiers who were about to go into the army, but they were being introduced to Palestinians to hear Palestinian issues. And they were leaving with an entirely different attitude. Because in the military, of course, they are taught to be strong and hard and steadfast. It was very impressive to break that barrier and for an Israeli soldier to meet some Palestinians, and even for myself to meet some Palestinians, even for me to sit with Ali and get the answers to questions that I was striving for. And the same thing that Rabbi Hanan says, I am getting to see people that I never got a chance to see were even there. And that's why I support the idea of Roots. And that's why I support the work that you do, Huda. And there are tough questions to ask because we want tough answers. We want to understand the answers. There might not be a right or wrong answer, but we want to hear your answer. And I gratefully respect your answer, and I gratefully respect your thing. And again, like I did with everybody else, I apologize that somehow Jews are connected to this situation that you have. And that'll be the last for my evening. Rabbi, thank you. Thank you, Huda.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully move from apologies to tikkun, to fixing, to changing your reality. Judy Gussman is waiting online to ask her question. Judy, you have to unmute yourself. Very good.
I just did. Thank you so much. Huda, I have two things that I would ask you to update us on. And one of them is about the US bill that is in the workings. And you know what I'm talking about. And the other one is, what is Women Wage Peace doing currently? And I just want to say it was beautiful to see video of you in that march. I just felt so happy for you, seeing you there. Okay, anyway, those are the two things I'd love updates about.
Our International Fund for Peace between Israelis and Palestinians, which is the Alliance for Middle East Peace, has been the sole advocate for years now, is now one step to being signed. It passed the House, and we're waiting on the Senate, and it's being led by Senator Lowy, and she is, this is her last year, and we have a great ambition that this will be, this will continue to be a law which will secure $250 million for 5 years for the peace building and development community in Israel and Palestine, which is unheard of, unprecedented, never happened. If any, what happened in the past is since this administration came to power in the United States, the peace funding was cut into half. Anything that is related to Palestinian peace building has been cut entirely. So, and the money goes only to the shared society that operates inside Israel and Palestine. And I have to say also, some federal money does not give money to Roots, because they think Roots is illegal because it's in the West Bank, so they don't get money. This bill will hopefully change all of that. And it's, we need your support. We need you to write to your representatives everywhere to support that bill. But this bill in itself made peace between J Street and AIPAC, you know, because both co-signed on it and they support it. And if you look at our website, allmep.org, you can see the number of organizations that are from the left to the right who support this bill. Now, Women Wage Peace, I need like 3 hours to speak about what they are doing. They are present, they are active, they are on every junction. They have put together last week a panel with ambassadors from certain countries where COVID-19 was a successful story for them. They put together a panel. We all live in Zoom now, so we do activism in Zoom. They put together a panel for women voices from all over the world about women and steadfastness and resistance. When they are not Women Wage Peace, they are also participating in the demonstrations in Balfour Street. They are called now Balfour demonstrations. They are continuing to do dialogue in the marginalized pockets of Israel, in settler communities, in para-free communities. They are working with in the Knesset, like they are the only maybe activists who stand there by the Knesset, shadowing almost every member of Knesset when it comes to laws against women or against Palestinians or against violence, etc. If Israel is going to hit another elections, they will be very active with the camps, with every camp on the election, supporting with empathy, but also asking, what did you do for peace, and what would you do to bring our kids back? So these are those tough questions that they keep asking the politicians in Israel. They are still kicking and very tough and very well known also internationally.
Thank you, Huda. We have so many more questions. Now we're going to George Douglas, who wants to ask a question.
Sure, Huda. You know, one thing that I see, which hasn't been talked about here, is that when I look at the organizations representing ALLMEP, I look at Roots, I actually see a lot of growth, and I think I've seen a lot of growth over the last 15 years. Growth well in excess of the growth of the population in the territories and in Israel. I think our vision for Roots is to grow Roots at a very high compound rate going forward. And I think, you know, everyone needs to keep this in mind, that the goal here is to grow this movement in terms of all the organizations to the point at which people of goodwill on both sides of the conflict have political power, and people of goodwill on both sides of the conflict can win elections. So I think, you know, in that sense, we're going in the right direction. and the work that you've done at ALLMEP and all of the underlying organizations have done, you know, is moving there. So I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about the challenges, but I think it's important to focus on all the progress that everyone involved in these organizations is making, because otherwise it looks like, you know, we should go do something else. And I don't think that. I think it's moving in the right direction, and I think I see that in the West Bank. I mean, Roots is something that couldn't have happened 15 years ago. So, you know, I think it's wrong to underestimate the challenges, but I think it's also wrong to kind of miss a lot of the progress that's being made and a lot of the vision that's out there and the vision that you have.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate it. Like, this is why I keep saying that I have hope. This is why I'm still doing this work with all the challenges that we are facing. This is why I fight for organizations like Roots to be part of ALLMEP. This is why ALLMEP grew from 70 organizations to 130 organizations. This is why the pool of money is widening. The peace space is shrinking, but the peace building people is growing. The community is growing, and it's actually engaging in a more courageous conversations, and we're becoming more visible, and ALLMEP is taking the visibility on its shoulders, and we will continue doing this until our voice is heard, until we all, again, the image I am seeing is that Palestinians and Israelis are marching everywhere in the world to bring peace and justice to everyone in this world. Because if any group of people has the potential to bring peace in this world, it's us. And that's why I believe in us. But we cannot do it without you guys. We cannot do it with you being the ones who can open the space for us to meet and do this open heart surgery. Do this human digging for humanity, not forgetting who we are deep, and being polarized by systems that doesn't care about us. Thank you so much. I will never forget that, and this is why I get up every morning, even during COVID-19.
Thank you, Huda. We have Chava who's waiting to ask something. And unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, it took me a second. It's almost 11 o'clock at night, so I'm a little bit tired. I had a few questions. Thank you so much, Huda. Shukran. I'm a tour guide here in Israel, and fortunately, I get to go, well, right now, not, but I get to guide plenty in Jericho and in Bethlehem. And so I have a few questions. I have Palestinian friends and I have Israeli friends who are Arab Israelis. And we have lots of dialogue all the time about these kinds of things. And so I have a few questions just because I'm wondering, and I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to ask one question. You mentioned the government, the peace process between Israel and the UAE was via the governments. And a lot of times people will blame Israel for the situation in the West Bank for the Palestinians. But from my experience and from speaking to other Palestinians that I have met is that it's not necessarily only the Israelis. Yes, maybe we have checkpoints. Yes, there are ways, and it's harder and it's not easy for Palestinians to get visas to come into Israel. But the fact that your government has ruled for 15 years or more and is refusing to go to elections because he probably knows he will lose the election and he doesn't want to lose the election. But for 15 years, you guys are stuck under this leader who's awful for your community and your people. And nobody ever talks about that in the media. Nobody ever brings that up. All the time when you hear anything against Palestinians, against, you only hear the occupation, you only hear Israeli soldiers, like, you know, shooting at kids and stuff like that. Like, I have experienced with my own experience being in a bus with tourists having rocks thrown at us. I've been on an Egged bus driving through Hebron, having rocks thrown at me as well. But I've also been to Hebron in a taxi and been fine and have no problems into the Arab side of Hebron, like the Palestinian side. I've also been in Bethlehem and not have any problems. But when I do come in, you said when you come into Israel proper and you get into a taxi, you feel a little bit of fear. When I go in with tourists, I have to call them and let them know I'm going in and out as a tour guide. And also, there's those big red signs that kind of make me feel unwelcome into the areas A. And so like that sense of security also, like we're supposed to be here like together. We're supposed to be like one place. We all share roots in this country, and yet all we see is when regarding the Palestinian conflict is that Israel's at fault, Israel's at fault, Israel's always shooting kids, Israel's always putting Palestinians in prison, but nobody ever talks about the government, where the government is really also like, you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't generalize, Chava. Again, I would warn you against it. There are Palestinians who
I'm
are
not generalizing. I'm talking about specific incidences that I've seen. And
there are Palestinians who are in prison, in Palestinian prisons, because they spoke against the government. There are teachers who are going into the streets against the government.
I'm sure.
We are criticizing the government. If there is any government in the world that has much criticism, I think it's just you guys don't get it. You don't see it in your news outlets. What we do in Palestine is we do that effort to translate Haaretz, Ma'arif, etc., and we read that much. We're, you know, to Arabic. So it's all, there is like 3 hours of Israeli media on the Palestinian TV every morning that we read through all. We see Musawa, the channel. We see Israel 24 in Arabic, and it's. I think it's a matter of how much we know about each other. And internally, we don't have one government. We have 2 governments. We keep forgetting Gaza and what's happening in Gaza, and we don't also, we should mention Egypt, and it's part of the siege on Gaza, so why only blaming Israel? And when it comes to the Arab world, you know, I'm sure you talked to the Palestinians who told you that, you know, there is no hope. But this all goes into portraying the Palestinians as victims all the time, which I think it's too dangerous, because once we are comfortable being victims, we will keep putting responsibility on any other forces but ourselves. And I think part of what we do in the peace building community, but also internal activism, is to get out of that. That's why I focus on steadfastness and resilience, because that's what gets us out of the victimhood mentality. Even when we criticize the Palestinian government, even when we know that the Mukhabarat might be now listening to us, and I'll get to be summoned in tomorrow, we need as Palestinians to take some responsibility for what's happening inside the Palestinian society. And because this is about women, you know, the amount of violence that is being practiced against women during COVID-19 with no system to protect women, we're speaking against it. We have demonstrations in the middle of Bethlehem against it. So that, you know, that's why this conflict is actually taking a lot of the Palestinian potential for being a society that is vital, has its own challenges, but also fighting. That's why this conflict is keeping us always in the victimhood mentality rather than the survivorhood mentality. And I would, you know, I see also the Israelis being so entrenched in the victimhood mentality. This has been done to us, it's going to happen again. That's why we need to secure ourselves. Although the Jewish community can teach the entire world how to survive one of the worst human atrocities and come through as the strongest minority in the world, and teach people how to do that. Still, in Israel, the mentality still has to deal with that victimhood. And again, I don't want to generalize. I am learning more, and I'm, you know, the Seder, I'm learning more from people like Rav Hanan about different kinds of Seders. I am learning about what it means to bring light to the world. We need to rethink all the narratives that we are living in, and we need to claim our space as liberated people rather than victims. As long as we are acting and thinking as victims, we will continue to fight each other, and we will continue to shame and blame, put responsibility on the world and not ourselves. And in my opinion, if the Palestinian cause is going to end at some point and have no voice, victimhood is going to be the one that killed the Palestinian cause, nothing else.
But my question was, how come
Yeah,
nobody?
I'm sorry, our time unfortunately is near the end. There are many people who want to ask questions. The next person online, I promised her, Yael. Yael, can you ask your question in 30 seconds?
Try. Thank you, Huda. My question is the difficulties that came with COVID-19 also can bring something that is an opportunity, is a kind of communication through telephone, Zoom, WhatsApp, could be a way of communication or connecting between women. Could it be possible to imagine kind of small groups of women who shares together Palestinian, Israeli, and like friendship, sisterhood, sharing, but no, as you said, learning from each other, getting like friends and other ways. Is it also possibility that came from this situation?
Yes, and it's bigger than when we physically used to meet because of the restrictions of movement and permits. And I cannot tell you how many Zoom calls that I've run or sat in as a participant that brings Israelis and Palestinians together, especially women. Not combatants, Bereaved Family Forum is doing this now, and they want to expand it to do Zoom living room invitation, where Palestinian and Israelis can be in their own living room, exploring cultural and not just cultural, also political, but inviting the other into your living room. And this is an initiative that we're working with them on, with women from the Family Forum. I have seen Seeds of Peace doing that, Creativity Hands, it's every one of us, at least the organizations that are under ALLMEP umbrella are doing this. And because of the comfort that comes with, and I would say to some extent security that comes with Zoom, we have more participants than we used to have when we physically would be in one room.
Thank you, Huda. Our time has come to an end. I'm sure that Huda is tired because we really worked her hard. She had to answer questions on so many different topics, so many different directions from so many different people, coming from so many different perspectives. I trust and I'm sure that we got larger perspectives in this call, in this event. We learned a lot. Huda, thank you very, very, very much. I feel that our minds have been expanded, hopefully our hearts as well. I would like to take 1 minute at the end for some housekeeping to remind everyone that next week at the same time, Roots is doing an event called From Black and White to Shades of Gray. From Black and White to Shades of Gray, Noor Awad, one of the main Palestinian activists and spokesmen of Roots, and Shaul Yudelman, one of the founders and the Israeli co-director of Roots, and he was on this call, perhaps he still is, will be talking about their personal experiences of transformation through meeting the other, the difficulties of meeting the other, what it does to you, how you have to re-examine yourself, your identity, your understanding of the other and the understanding of your own people, and the great and difficult things that occur in the wake of that. That's Noor Awad and Shaul Yudelman. I also just want to remind everyone that you can sign up for that through our Eventbrite announcements. If you don't have the announcement, you don't have the link, just write me an email, ravchanan@gmail.com. And of course, the last thing I'll say, to go back to what I said at the beginning, an hour and a half ago, remember the first annual Roots Run for Reconciliation, September 13th. Run with us or run wherever you are in the world. Pledge money for the run to donate to Roots. Pledge money, an extra amount. If your favorite Roots person runs faster, then he's expected to. If you want more information about that, go to the Roots page on Facebook or write me an email, ravchanan@gmail.com. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm sure we learned quite a bit. Thank you, Huda. Thank you.
Thank you, Rav. I really appreciate it. I don't take it for granted you take time off to listen to us here in the crazy Holy Land. So I really appreciate it. Have a great day wherever you are.
Thank you.